During its inception in 2000, when the treaty that establishes the East African Community was signed, the major objectives of that then were to facilitate free movement of goods and services. Services means people across the partner states. The then partner states were Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. Of course, later on, 2007, were joined by Rwanda, Burundi, and also we've been joined, 2016, we've been joined by Sudan. Okay. And there's also a possibility of Somalia and the DRC joining, because they have shown expressed interest, and their membership is being discussed. But basically, the objectives were to promote trade and movement of services and investment among the partner states, to promote integration and cooperation in different areas like finance, tax, currency in terms of monetary currency, and of course, finally, to achieve that broader political integration, where we were supposed to have one form of government. But also importantly, another objective is also to promote cooperation in different shared resources. We have shared resources as partner states, like Lake Victoria, like Mount Kilimanjaro, between Uganda and between Kenya and
What do you mean by shared resources? For the sake of our viewer,
we have shared natural resources, which we believe that because we always natural resources, be it rivers, be it water, be it minerals, they usually create wars. If not well managed, if not well governed, shared. So, because we share these natural resources as partner states, it is important that we look on means on how we can cooperate in preserving them, but also utilizing them in a sustainable way. So, for example, Lake Victoria, which is shared by 3 partner states, we have the Lake Victoria Basin, which is important in ensuring that, for example, we don't overfish, we don't overpollute the lake and all that. We ensure seamless lake transport and water transport and all that. When it comes, for example, to Mount Kilimanjaro shared between Kenya and Tanzania, that is also important. How do you, for example, protect the mountain from encroachment, from certification and all that? Same like, for example, when it comes to Uganda and Tanzania, it's like River Kagera. This is another shared resource. How we utilize, for example, such a river is important. That if Uganda, for example, were to utilize River Kagera in a way that curtails or that compromises the ability of Tanzania to be able to utilize its share, that would result into a serious tension between the countries. So that is also the issue that we should cooperate. We came into a union to ensure that we cooperate in utilization of shared natural resources as partner states.
And do you think for us to perform better, do we need to come together as a country?
Yes, as a region, it is always better to be united, to be as one, because when you look at the global terrain, for example, when we come to trade negotiations, you are weak when you negotiate as a single country, but you have more voice, you are listened more to more
when you come together.
When you come together and you're speaking as the East African community, as one region, you look at the different per capita income, the GDP of these 5 countries, now 6 countries combined, you get the biggest populations now that we have, so you start speaking with a strong voice, and you listen to, and you can easily influence policies. 2, when it comes to facilitating trade, for land, I don't want to use the word landlocked. We usually call ourselves land-linked.
But that's the fact. We are landlocked country.
Well, we are land-linked, depending on where one stands.
It's a language battle.
I know,
but that's the fact.
So, for land, linked countries like Uganda,
Okay.
Rwanda, you need to trade across, like they said, the EU, and you don't have enough air transport facilities that you are going to shut out through the air, through airplanes, your products. You need the access the ocean. You can only do that by being on good terms with your neighbors like Kenya or the Islam, which have access to the sea. But that itself will not help, will not be enough. It is important to negotiate in a way that the cost of doing business reduces. For example, if you find that once goods have been cleared at the Mombasa, they should not be subjected to further tests and further delays at the
Different checks by URA and many.
Absolutely. So that is the kind of importance to a trader, that a trader from Kasita finds it more beneficial for him and more easy for him to trade now to Europe, to trade China, to trade with China, to export or import from China or Europe, because as a result of these countries coming together, as a result of Uganda and Kenya coming together, we have eased on our trading relations, on how do we declare goods, how do we allow goods to move, how do we, so that's the importance, that you can't do it alone.
Okay, with this high spread of COVID-19, this pandemic, do you see us coming together, and to what extent have we really performed in terms of all these countries coming together?
I should say
basing on quite a number of difference, locational distance.
Yes. I should say that if I were to rank the East African community, by 2017, from 2000 to 2017, I would have given the EAC 75% in terms of achieving its objectives. At least we had a number of, we had made progress in the elimination of non-tariff barriers. Non-tariff barriers are those, they are not tariffs, they are barriers, but they are not tariff related. So, for example, if it is the roadblocks or corruption on the border, those are non-tariff, but they are barriers to trade. So we had at least moved into elimination of such non-tariff related barriers. We had moved a lot in terms of having a one area network, that it was easier for a trader in Kenya, a Ugandan trader in Kenya to call to Uganda, or a Ugandan trader to call in Kenya or Rwanda and be charged similar tariffs in terms of rates. We had moved in terms of cooperation in tourism, that tourists will come from Kenya and they are given one tourist visa, single tourist visa, and they are able to move from Uganda, Kenya, and Rwanda. That was the kind of, so we had progressed in terms of harmonizing our trade policies, so we had progressed. But from 2016 to date, to COVID, and even like a post-COVID, we have gone back. We have backtracked on the progress that we had achieved.
And what has caused this backtracking?
So you will realize that in terms of trade, we started negotiating as a single region, East African community. For example, the trade agreement which we were negotiating with the European Union. But when it came towards its conclusion, Kenya signed alone and ratified alone. I'm talking about the Economic Partnership Agreement, which is a free trade agreement between East African Community and the European Union, which is meant to bring about reciprocal free trade between Europe and EAC. So while we negotiated as a bloc, we did not sign as a bloc, as EAC. Kenya signed alone.
You went as a country?
As a bloc, as the region,
as
East African Community to negotiate. We were negotiating as one.
Which was very dangerous.
No, which was important. Remember, we were negotiating the agreements, and we negotiated as all the 5 partner states. Okay? But when it came to signing, Kenya signed alone. And like you're saying, it is very dangerous. Because if countries have negotiated together,
I thought they would sign together.
Thank you. And that creates a problem to East African community integration. Ask me why. Because you will realize that by it being a free trade agreement, it means that goods coming from the EU, the East African community, will attract no tax, will attract no tariff, vice versa. Now, imagine a situation where now that Kenya has signed, if Kenya was to implement the agreement, all goods coming from the European Union would be coming to Kenya. But since we are a common market, they would find their way to other partner states. Imagine how that would be in terms of disrupting intra-regional trade.
Okay.
Then you would now start seeing Uganda putting roadblocks on goods coming from Kenya. So it would disrupt.
Does that have a connotation with the single customs that you are a...
Absolutely, absolutely. We would cease having a single customs territory if partner states start negotiating free trade agreements on their own, which also contravenes the East African Treaty, because the treaty establishing EAC says that partner states, EAC partner states, should engage into negotiations, both trade and investment, as one bloc, as one region.
Okay.
No different partner states doing different things, in order to promote that unity in all the aspects of economic. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the trade wars that have stood to test the strength and the consolidation of the opportunities there in EAC. If I were to give you just of the, we've been having trade tensions, milk wars. I don't want to use the word wars. Okay, milk disagreements between Uganda and Kenya. By Kenya putting a stop on Uganda's milk.
Yes.
Currently, that was actually before COVID, 2 months before COVID, Feb, March. Currently we are having a sugar wars between Uganda and Kenya.
And the prices, as we talk right now, have actually reduced.
Absolutely, they have reduced. And remember, who is losing? The citizens. And if you look at the motto of East African community, it is embrace your destiny. That East African, that we the citizens should embrace the opportunities in the East African community. Okay. But what opportunities are there? You are telling a farmer, a sugarcane farmer in Busoga region, to embrace the benefits that come from integration. And that is being able to access market for his sugarcane in, let's say, Kenya, in Rwanda, in Tanzania. That is what you're telling them.
Okay.
But then in practice, you are stopping them from trading their sugarcane, from selling their sugarcane. So what opportunity are you telling them then to embrace? That is the test that we are having. We are testing. East African integration is now currently being tested. Let's now go back. Uganda, to date, Uganda since 1986, when this government came into power.
The NRM government?
Yes. Uganda has been blocking Kenya's beef from entering into Uganda. It's a non-tariff. It's a non-tariff. It's a trade tension that has been there. It has never been addressed. We have been having a crisis of maize in Uganda.
In Uganda,
where maize was selling at 100 shillings. Remember that time? In that same time, the Parliament of Kenya, especially the Nairobi County, pushed that Kenya should import maize from Brazil and Mexico. When we had
and yet we have a lot of maize here in Uganda.
Exactly. And Kenya is the biggest consumer of maize, or maize, both grain and whole maize grain, and that we are unable to buy from our own. That is the kind of...
What could be the underlying factors explaining this?
And lastly, the issue, as I'm having the question, look at Rwanda. Uganda trade standoff. We have made the year, and they closed in Feb. Now we are Feb 2019. Now we are in July 2020. 1 year plus, the border is still closed. Uganda's goods cannot access the other. Rwandan goods cannot access Uganda. That shows you the kind of tensions. Tanzania cannot speak to Rwanda. Tanzania cannot speak to Burundi. That we even cannot address our own challenges. That it is a country which is far off, like Angola, which can only come to. So let me go to your question. What is the underlying?
What could explain the underlying factors?
Yeah, underlying factors. One, like I was indicating, we started by putting the people at the heart of integration in terms of consultations. We used to have, for example, the Secretary General's Forum, which was for civil society and the private sector. Every year, we would meet with the Secretary General, and we take stock and audit of the opportunity of the activities by the EAC, what have been the challenges, and resolve the issues, and we could come up with a roadmap every year on how we are going to address these challenges, and give them timelines that by March this year we should have done ABCD. That's what when we meet the next year, we are able to audit how far have we gone and the challenge is that was largely donor funded. GIZ, if I may even mention them, it was donor funded. It was not funded by our own partners testing in their own coffers. Since 2015, we don't have, in terms of, even though we have the same East African Community Secretary General's Forum, it is now more of a national thing than a regional. This used to be a 1 week meeting with numerous stakeholders. So we lost people as a result of that forum not being held in its full vigor and rigor. We lost out the people. Two, trade tensions, disagreements. At the beginning of the community, we were told that this is going to be a people-centered and people-driven, private sector-driven integration.
Driven by the individuals, the Ugandans from...
Yes, by the private sector. That was the promise, that it is going to be people at the heart, not individuals. But practically, like you're saying, it has ceased to be people. Actually, you don't even see people in this.
And what explains the fact that it's not more of a people-centered concept?
What explains it is because that we currently say that a standoff between the individuals in Uganda and Kenya and Tanzania makes traders unable to sell their produce across the border.
Well, dear viewers, those that have just joined us, I am with Africa Rogers, the programs coordinator here at SEATINI Africa, making sense of the East African concept where all these countries at one point must become one in terms of perception, in terms of location, in terms of how they manage different issues. Africa, you seem to be suggesting, in one of the things that you put forward, between the conflict between Rwanda and Uganda, could this be a political battle, or it could be an economic battle, in your perspective?
Well, in my perspective, it is both. It is both. Yes,
you seem to be hesitant.
No, yeah.
Allow me go for a very short commercial break. We will be discussing that and more after this commercial break. Don't go away.
Smart 24. Smart business.
My friend tested positive for coronavirus disease.
Oh, sorry.
How is he now?
He's okay. He was treated and discharged, but when he went back home, the community asked him to move to another place because they fear he might infect them.
That's sad. But you know, people with the coronavirus disease can be treated and completely recover from COVID-19.
True. We really need to take this information out there so everyone in the community knows the truth.
Everyone has a chance to recover from COVID-19. We need to welcome all those people that have returned in our communities, support them, and love them as others.
To prevent the spread of the coronavirus disease, follow the guidelines offered by government. Call the toll-free number 919 for more information and support. This message is brought to you by the Ministry of Health.
Patiko and Zahara Toto, you are our winner tonight!
Uganda come together, and we win it together. Hey, me and you and me, Mama Nyaba. You and I and you, Mama Nyaba. When you win, I win also. When you dance, I dance also. I'm cause some better better than you. Mami now what do you want? I join me here. Together, I see we are winning. Me and we.
Ono ye Momo Nyabo together. Kozesa by MTN app oba nyiga star emomo kagatano hash okugula airtime oba bundles wefunira omukiso kwewangulira omudidi gw'ensimbi eziwulira ddala obukadde obutaano buli lunaku nga zizo n'abaagalwa abo. Tosubwa akazannyo ka Momo Nyabo ku ssaawa 2 n'eddakiika 2 ez'akawungeezi okuva ku Mande okutuusa ku Lwokutaano.
What is wrong with you?
Give your family the best classy TV experience. Unmatched cartoons on Nickelodeon, ST Kids and Da Vinci Learning for children. Classy Ladies, Novella E Plus for Cinderella telenovelas, Ebony Life and Fine Living for trendy lifestyle. ST Nollywood Plus for the latest Nigerian movies. And for gentlemen, award-winning series on Fox. Simply subscribe to Classic Bouquet and enjoy an amazing offer of only 26,000 shillings per month. Classic Bouquet, a feeling of class.
Fellow Ugandans, I would like to thank you for being patient during the lockdown days as the Ministry of Health was making all endeavors to prepare itself in ensuring that cases do not increase to an abnormal situation. As we transition from a national lockdown, we still need to remain
Smart 24. Smart Business.
Well, it's a pleasure, those of you that have just joined us in this very extensive discussion. My guest is Kiiza
Africa.
My guest is Kiiza Africa. We are still making sense of the concept of the East African community. Uganda and the rest of other countries have a vision that at one point they can come together in terms of perception, in terms of how they look at things, in terms of how they trade with one another. But as we talk right now, the relationship between Uganda and Rwanda seems not to be on the same page. And yet we are striving to be one in the different things. What explains this? Africa.
Yes.
Uganda and Rwanda, as we talk right now, their relationship is not on the same page. One looks at the other side, and another looks on the other side. Does this have a connotation with what we are discussing?
Definitely, definitely. The concept of integration is that sovereign countries who are willing to go into an integration will secede will give out some of their powers to supranational bodies, like now the East African Community Secretariat.
Okay.
That, for example, in terms of handling trade, it will no longer be Uganda handling trade, but rather the East African Community Secretariat that should be designing trade policies and also ensuring that these policies are implemented. The Rwanda-Uganda standoff, the Rwanda-Kenya standoff, the Kenya-Tanzania standoff, the Tanzania-Rwanda-Tanzania-Burundi standoff, the Uganda-South Sudan standoff, the standoff in terms of the fact that our Ugandan traders are always charged visa fees per movement. When you're entering, they charge you visa fees. When you're coming out, they charge you visa fees. When you go again, they charge you visa fees. That all standoff shows that we have failed to abide to the instruments that bound us to form the East African community. And why? Because we have failed to let the private sector and the people, the citizens, go into the driving seat. We are no longer consulting people on these issues.
One would suggest, one would suggest, now that we are striving to be one, in a situation where Rwanda and Uganda are not on the same page, that different countries that subscribe to the East African community would have been very fundamental in bringing us back to be on the same page. But they seem to be silent.
It's not that they seem to be silent, because they know that there's nothing that they can do. I mean, the issue is that loyalty, our partner states' loyalty to East African community has been questionable. Let me give an example. Tanzania played a big role in the liberation of Uganda. Political liberation. One of the reasons why that was is because Nyerere then believed in regional integration, in East African integration. Now, it is, for example, the role of another partner state like Kenya to interfere to come to try to bring these two countries like Uganda and Rwanda together. But he cannot. Do you know why? Because if you look at the instruments at the EAC treaty, when it comes to the section of settlement of disputes, it is the president, it is the chairman of the EAC who can call for a meeting and even issue orders on how to address differences between partner states. Unfortunately, currently, the chairman is Rwanda, who is now at the tension with Uganda. So I don't see the chairman now issuing.
So it becomes very hard. In Uganda, we know Lugama anti.
Yes.
We know Tosovola Kusala. Warumusango Sovola Kusala, Castovango Lipat. So Rwanda finds it very hard to address some of these.
It cannot, because now how will it someone? Because it is already entangled into this whole thing. So that's it. But another important thing which is showing this is because we have failed to create instruments, to create institutions which should facilitate free movement of goods. We can talk about the political integration later on, but the people's primary concern is trade and movement.
That's the core.
That's the core. Business. Why countries decide to come together is major to ensure that if I have my maize, if my people have my maize, they can easily sell it across the border. If I want soap, I can easily buy it from the neighbor. Now, one of the reasons that we have failed to achieve that is we have failed to separate different institutions that should address different tensions. We have the East African Court of Justice, for example, which is meant to play that role, but it is overwhelmed. You can't handle political related wars, you can't handle human rights related wars, and then rather issues, and then you again handle trade related issues. As one judge, as one institution.
You seem to be suggesting that you should handle it as sector by sector.
Exactly. It is because business is the core of integration. It is always important to have, you can emulate models.
But leadership is also key.
I agree. But you can emulate models of other regions like ECOWAS, where you have a dispute settlement mechanism and court. which is different from, we have seen ECOWAS has, for example, interfered politically in the Ivory Coast and all that, but that has been by a different court.
Okay. Earlier on you narrated, when it came to the trade wars.
Yes.
How has this affected SME, small and medium enterprise business and traders? Because we can't leave this wise discussion having not discussed some of the effect, especially on the SMEs and traders.
And maybe to underscore the fact that this integration is made real, not by the big businesses, but by the small businesses, the small MSMEs, these informal cross-border traders, those whom they call the mama boga, those who just cross from the border with the kilogram of maize or of beans and sell it to the other border and then come back with a kilogram of maybe of vegetables. It is those that actually create the actual integration, that they feel they are belonging into the integration. Those are the people. But we are not addressing their pride by keeping on crossing this border. So maybe
they seem to be minor. They seem to be minor.
Absolutely. Because that is how we have boxed ourselves, that we tend to calculate, for example, how much will Madivani bring in terms of revenue, right? Then how much will Africa, who is an informal cross-border trader.
So you seem to be suggesting that our concentration has been put on people like the Madivan, the big and leaving the small and medium,
absolutely.
Which also partly contribute a lot.
That is why we don't have an EAC MSME policy. We don't have. That is why we don't have an EAC policy on informal cross-border traders. But informal cross-border traders form 75%, if not 80%, of trading in the East African community. So when you're talking about uniting countries, uniting partner states, these are the people who are going to give you the actual unity.
So what keeps you in position as SEATINI? Because these are things you should have put in place. These are things you should have agitated for. So what keeps you in position?
We've already done that. We took a case to the East African Court of Justice at the beginning of last year, in July last year, where we are saying that, traders have suffered because these traders had loans from banks. These traders had loans, had mortgaged their properties. They have suffered losses. So we are asking for compensation, that they should be compensated. And actually, even in the current discussions between Rwanda and Uganda, we have maintained that these traders must be compensated, especially the small-scale traders, because they lost a lot. 2, we have been asking for a declaration from the Court of Justice of East Africa that there should not be any repeat of such a trade tension in any partner state. That we should never see, for example, Kenya shutting its borders with Tanzania, because that goes against the spirit of East African integration. 3, we have asked for separation of creation of a single entity, a single mechanism, like a court, which will entirely look at addressing trade tensions in the region. These are the demands we have made in our case. In terms of hearing, the case has a bit slowed down because of COVID-19, but at least we are constantly in touch of igniting the hearing and all that. But these are some of the things that we have been pushing for. And lastly, also, of course, we've been pushing for, we've been also working with Ministry of East African Community Affairs, because as SEATINI, we are members of the National Monitoring Committee of non-tariff barriers. So every quarter we design a scorecard to see how far is Uganda and other partner states scoring when it comes to reduction and elimination of non-tariff barriers.
People seem to be rational, attaching all different explanations for failing to perform on COVID-19. But there are some factors that have contributed for East African countries not coming together, even right away before COVID came into existence, particularly here in Uganda. So how do you address the effects of some of the traders that they have gone through?
I agree with you. We are using COVID-19 as a scapegoat, even before
we are actually being rational.
Yeah,
COVID, it is COVID.
Absolutely, no, it is not. Remember the coalition of the willing, where we had Uganda, Kenya, and Rwanda agreeing on some things and leaving out Tanzania? It is, let me give you a scenario. It is cheaper to be in Tanzania now as a Ugandan. If I went to Tanzania and I call the UK or USA, it will be cheaper than me calling Uganda.
Cheapest in terms of what?
In terms of money, in terms of tariffs.
Okay.
If I travel to Tanzania and I decide to call a friend in the United States, I will be charged less than if I decided to call you when I'm in Tanzania. Because we agreed on one area network where we are going to apply the same tariffs as just 3 countries, Uganda, Kenya, and Rwanda. And we left out Tanzania. So yes, it started way back indeed. COVID-19 is just a scapegoat. The border closure was never because of COVID-19. It was because of... So what you're asking about, one, it is important that we go back, as we are celebrating 20 years of East African community. It is important we go back on the drawing board and look at what have we done wrong.
But what are we celebrating in the last 20 years?
Yes, there's a lot.
You've heard the quote of people say most people celebrate years in life, but never had life in years. So what are we celebrating?
No. At least we have
at least you've had that local quote.
We have, look,
you celebrate years, but you've never had life in years. What are we celebrating?
We have had life in these years. On that one, even though I am a critic of government, I'm going to support this. That look at, for example, the the electronic window system, where cargo transfer, where you can track your cargo from Mombasa up to Maraba or up to Mutukura, up to, let's look at the one-stop border posts. There's a lot of clearness that it is easier now for people from Kasita, for example, to trade within the region, but also to export or import from other countries without passing through heavy and lots of duties and fines and also delayed processes. That has been eased. In terms of common policies, we have had at least some common policies which we can register. Like a common tourist policy. Currently now, just in the papers of today, if you are a veterinary doctor, if you are an engineer, if you are an architecture, if you are a banker, you are now free. Of course, you may ask me about the practicality of it. That is something God says. But you are now free to move and work and seek for employment in all EAC partner states. There is some progress that we have re-registered.
Okay.
But true, largely, 70% remains on paper. And I agree with you. 70% of the life in the 20 years is not there.
You seem to be agreeing with me to a great
I agree
extent.
with you. I agree with you. Yes, 70% to the greater extent. We are just flourishing like that biblical fig tree, very leafy, but no fruits. So we have all these policies. We have not. And why? Because we have forgotten one aspect: people-centered, people-driven. As long as we don't bring people into these processes, as long as we continue seeing heads of states acting not in the interest of the traders, of the MSMEs, of the people, but rather in their interests,
okay,
that already creates confusion.
This discussion reminds me of a history concept. You heard of what we call the Bourbon monarchy,
yes,
which forgot nothing and surely learned nothing. What is it that, as we celebrate the 20 years, what is it that we must unlearn from the past for us to help us progress in life? And
thank you, Mr. Mkwai. Unfortunately, you're right that we seem to be going back to the time where it was a heads of state-led. When the EAC was being formed again in 2000, we were promised that this time around, it is people citizens and the private sector who will drive the integration agenda. The word agenda is important. That you decide this is our agenda. The people would determine the agenda.
The direction.
Thank you. If you were to ask me where those people are, whether that has been tenable, no. Is it the people who demanded that, for example, Rwanda and Uganda close borders? Is it the people? No. Actually, it is people who are being shot at, who are being killed by trying to, So we have learned nothing that it is important to separate political, in terms of individual heads of states driven integration from people driven integration. We started very good, but as we progress, we seem to be going back. That's why you realize that Kenya will wake up in the morning and slap tariffs and close off Uganda's sugar, when Kenya trades actually more with Uganda than any other country.
As we plan to sign out, what is our responsibilities as Ugandans, as citizens, as traders, as business people? What is our role in making sure that this comes to a reality?
Yes, it is important to do civic engagement engage with the negotiators, engage with the policymakers, especially those in political power, over addressing this. Not with the minister, for example, for trade and EAC are very important in addressing this. They are quiet.
Honorable Chambade and Honorable.
Yes, they have tried. I will not really say that they are quiet. They have tried to their extent, but their trying is not enough. It does not help when you try to address the Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda issues, and yet the trader 1 year plus, traders cannot access the market. And let us not disarm this market. These are important. Rwanda is Uganda's, for example, is Uganda's second market after Kenya. So you cannot really tell a trader that you are trying when his market destination is not open. So first of all, we should engage them. Most importantly, them also creating a kind of commercial dialogue with fellow private sector in other countries. Let's take an example. If the Kasita of Uganda works in hand with the
the Kasita of wherever it is.
Exactly. That is the kind of dialogue that you need. And once the private sector, let's take an example. If the PSF, Public Sector Foundation of Uganda, works with the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, works, for example, with, in terms of coordination, collaboration, issuing joint statements, issuing joint positions. For example, I would have expected the Kenya Association of Manufacturers and Uganda Manufacturers Association of Uganda to issue one unified and joint proposal and statement on this Kenya-Uganda sugar war. They have done nothing. So when even we as private sector, as business sector, we are disunited, it gives even, it makes the politicians less supportive and less reactive to addressing these challenges. So it is important that traders get hand in hand and work together towards that. Let them invest in research, let them invest into lobbying, actual lobbying. In the European Union, the private sector, there is no position that, for example, the president of the EU can take without consulting the private sector, or if the private sector does not like it. So we would like to have such kind of, the East African Business Council, it is quiet. I haven't seen, for example, them saying that we are taking it to court, or them saying that we are doing ABCD. Nothing. So we have to see that proactiveness, not just issuing a statement and we keep quiet, but no, proactiveness in terms of let the traders, let them speak out, let them engage the ministers, let them threaten the members of parliament not to vote them into power and all that. And that way, you are able now to bring back power to the people. And that way, you are able to create what the EAC strives at achieving, a people-centered and private sector-driven integration.
Africa, Kiiza, time seems not to be our best friend.
Yes.
The most important words of a person are his last words. What are your last remarks?
I just said my last words, that it is important that we take back the integration process. We have achieved a lot. I will not deny that. There is a lot that we have achieved, but yet more is yet to be achieved. We have exposed our weaknesses. We have shown that even the core binding aspects of trade are now staggering in terms of the trade tensions, and that affects not only the people, the traders, but it also affects our revenues collection as countries, which ends up also affecting our social services delivery and all that. So let us take back, let us go back and ensure that we come up with mechanisms of addressing these tensions, and let us ensure that we have no repeats of such trade tensions, so that in the next 20 years, when we are celebrating the 40 years of EAC, we are able to see a seamless and a fully integrated East African community.
Thank you so much, Africa. Kiiza, for your most valuable time. I was told by one of my lecturers that if you are to survive in the 21st century, there are 3 things you must do. You must be able to learn, relearn, and unlearn, especially in some of the mistakes that we do.
Absolutely.
Time seems not to be our best friend, but that's all we've had. Our engagement has focused on the East African community and how best we can participate as individuals, as traders, as local Ugandans, and even the rest of the other people across the board. My name is Fred.
Smart 24. Smart Business.